Welcome to the Train the Trainer session. This is Understanding Dog Behavior and Body Language by Chris Pulse. Dog behavior is a term used to describe the way an animal responds to a particular situation or stimulus. Dog body language describes how a dog uses various parts of its body in combination to give an overall image of how it's feeling. It is a dog's primary means of communication, yet for many humans, it's like a completely foreign language. So why is it important for a dog class instructor to understand dog behavior? First, you have personal safety. You don't know the dogs that are coming into the class. You don't know their histories, what might scare them or get them overexcited. So you need to be able to read dog body language to help keep yourself safe and to know which dogs you can approach and which ones need more space, and to know which dogs are likely to be able to settle in with some time and which ones need to be directed to private sessions or a reactive dog class and why. Knowing dog behavior will help you articulate the reasons you think it's better for the dog. You also want to help the handlers. When you understand what a dog is trying to say, it can help you explain that to the handler. One of the biggest things that separates new trainers from experienced trainers is the ability to speak dog, to carry on a two-way conversation with the dog, to maximize the training session and reduce confusion and frustration at both ends of the leash. So we need to help share that knowledge with people that are new to dogs or that don't understand what their dog is trying to say. Instead of saying, "Your dog's stressed," and leaving it at that, tell them, "Your dog is communicating that he's struggling, and I can tell that because I see," fill in the blank. We are trying to teach the owners how to train their dog, but it is much harder to do if they think of it as a one-way conversation where they speak and the dog listens or obeys. If they can't tell the dog is too stressed to learn, we can give them management techniques, but they have to understand when to use them based on what the dog is saying. We also want to help the dog. Dogs try so hard to communicate with humans. It has to be so frustrating for that to all fall on deaf ears, or would that be blind eyes? We want to help the dogs by teaching the owners to understand what the dog is trying to tell them, knowing how a dog is feeling, where their focus is, what the dog wants at that moment, if they're even able to learn and process what we're trying to teach. That's huge. It also helps us arrange the training environment to set the dogs up for success instead of failure. When we understand a dog's canine ways, their natural body language, and what each behavior means, then we can begin to communicate effectively. It helps to understand that normal and natural dog behavior is the behavior that comes naturally to wild canines and third world village dogs. Normal dogs pee and poop anywhere they want, except maybe where they sleep. They don't come when called, and they don't respond to human verbal cues. Our verbal language is a completely foreign language to them. It's amazing that dogs learn as much as they do, considering how different our primary means of communication are. They default to fear when responding to a new stimuli in their environment, because fear is a survival adaptation that helps keep a dog safe. Fear and suspicion are normal. Happily accepting anything and anyone is what is abnormal, and it is achieved through acclimation and socialization and through genetics carefully selected by humans. They chew, dissect, and destroy anything that they choose. Garbage, expensive panties, shoes. They resource guard anything they value and desire. It's how they keep other dogs from taking their food and prime sleeping spots. They bark and growl, the next most popular means of communication after body language. And dogs often learn that humans respond better to vocalizations than they do the silent body language. They bite, and they don't have bite inhibition with people, unless it's trained or genetically selected to be more likely. They dig holes to find food, for a cooler sleeping spot, and because it's fun. They vocalize when left alone, because they don't know it's not forever. that it's not their new normal, and it is scary to be trapped and alone, or because they want to be doing something else and the humans respond better to vocalizations. They chase anything that might be prey or fun to chase. They pull against restraint, like when put on a leash. They're not comfortable with having any equipment on them. Collars, harnesses, leashes, muzzles, clothes, boots, all those are foreign. They often like to run around as fast as they can, even if they knock over small children and grandma in the process. They like to sniff everything. A human's primary sensory input is our eyes. For dogs, scent is the primary way that dogs get information. They go anywhere they please, such as onto countertops and furniture and rooms you thought you blocked off. They don't like every dog they meet, and that is completely normal for dogs and people. They don't want to be hugged, kissed, touched, or stared at. They don't like grooming by humans. They definitely don't want all those good smells washed off, or nails trimmed, mats removed, teeth brushed, vet exams, etc. And they don't naturally love being confined in a house or a crate or car or any other kind of tether. It's amazing that dogs can even live with humans, because pretty much every natural and normal behavior they have is the opposite of what we want from them. Throw in a lack of communication, and of course there's going to be conflicts. That's why people bring dogs in for training, and we need to help them understand what I just covered. Dogs have a complex language that they use to communicate with other dogs, as well as humans. Cats, they don't get it. We need to learn their language as much as they need to learn ours. Body language is the main way they communicate with other dogs, but they often learn that humans are dense and very hard to train. So they escalate their body language to do things like jumping up or bouncing, or they often end up using vocalizations. In other words, things that are hard for most humans to ignore. And they use these to express desires or frustrations. Helping people understand that they can read dog body language will help them start looking for the more subtle communication signals like glances, movement toward or away from something, and ear and tail position. A dog that feels heard will be more relaxed and won't feel the need to ramp up their communication. So include observations about your dog's body language throughout your classes. The better the dog and handler are at communicating, the less frustrating life is for both ends of the leash. Adolescence is often the time when most people seek help with their training. It's also the most difficult time for a dog because their bodies and brains are literally changing. Hormones are kicking in, and just like with human teenagers, it affects their ability to think. If the handler instilled good training in their puppy, then adolescence is the time when all that hard work seems to go out the window. And if they didn't have much training, then the teenage dog may be almost unmanageable. Dogs get more bold, less clingy. They don't come when called. Rules go out the window. They want to explore, and they don't care how far from their person they get now. For this reason, dogs between 5 and about 12 to 18 months old should be kept on a leash, a long line, or in an enclosed area. We need to do the thinking for them and not set them up to fail while their brains are adjusting to the changes going on inside them. When people understand that the dog is not giving them a hard time, the dog is having a hard time, the way they think and feel about the situation can change for the better. They can be more willing to be patient and help the dog, rather than getting frustrated and looking to punish. Tell them to put it on a piece of paper on the fridge to remind them. The dog is not giving me a hard time. The dog is having a hard time and needs help and instruction. Dog body language is complex and subtle and nuanced, but humans tend to try and simplify it. Some common misinformation includes a wagging tail always means the dog is happy, and a panting face is like a dog smile, but both of those are false. You can't look at a single part of the dog and get the whole sentence the dog is saying. If you look at the whole body and see a dog that is loose and wiggly and relaxed, That's generally a sign that the dog is relaxed and happy. If any part of the dog's body is tense or moving stiffly, the dog may not be relaxed and comfortable. It might be stressed, or fearful, or feeling defensive, or overexcited. You have to look at the whole body, the whole sentence, as well as the context in which the signals are taking place to get the right message. The calm, relaxed, neutral feeling dog can be summed up with the phrase, just chillin'. It has a relaxed body, no tension, the tail may be hanging or laying still, or it may be wagging loosely. The eyes are soft, not a hard stare. Ears are relaxed. The mouth has no tension and may be open or closed. The dog doesn't focus hard on any one thing. These dogs are comfortable in their surroundings and are able to learn. Dogs with this body language are generally safe to approach. Just watch for changes in their body language as you do so. The happy and playful dog. Dogs express joy and contentment in several ways. Happy dogs have generally relaxed bodies. The ears of a happy, playful dog may be in any position, but they are generally not rigid and fixed into a single position. If the dog is standing, the tail is usually slightly higher than normal and wagging in a relaxed manner. There may be a whole body wag. The mouth is often open and relaxed with the tongue out. Eyes may get squinty. The dog may get into a play bow if it's feeling playful. Be aware that some dogs play with a back and forth combination of hard, stiff freezes and fast, tense movement, but this typically indicates over-arousal, which I'll cover in a moment. What you're likely to see in a class setting is a dog that has a relaxed, tension-free body and a relaxed, wagging tail. These dogs are comfortable in their surroundings and are ready to learn. They're also generally safe to approach. As with joy, dogs express anxiety and stress in many ways. There are different kinds of stress and different levels or degrees of stress. One type of stress is excitement stress, when a dog is overly excited by something they love. Frustration stress, when a dog is not able to do what they really want to do, or they're confused but wanting to try to get things right, they can have frustration. Just like with people, being frustrated is not pleasant. So we want to try and avoid putting or keeping the dogs in that state. A dog barking and jumping while waiting in line for lure coursing or dock diving may be having both excitement stress and frustration stress. The dog is over threshold of self-control, and that affects their ability to think and can release the same chemicals in the brain as a fear response. Because those chemicals get the dog's body ready for action. Usually it's fight or flight, but it can also be for any adrenaline-inducing situation. Negative stress is the type most people are familiar with. Something the dog doesn't like that causes nervousness, anxiety, or fear. Some dogs respond to negative stress by stressing up. They get more energetic or frantic. These dogs may look happy, but they're actually stressed. These dogs express their stress through movement. Getting the zoomies in response to the dog being asked to do something can be a stress response. Hyperactivity when the dog is not usually hyper can also be a stress response. Even more intense play can be an indication, but the dog looks excited, so it's not often seen as stress. This is similar to people who laugh when they're nervous, and those that have to be doing something, anything, even pacing when they're stressed. They may sound happy or look focused on a task, but that's just the way their body deals with how they're feeling. Other dogs stress down and may take that as far as laying down and refusing to move, which some people read as stubbornness, when in reality, they're mentally shut down and completely overwhelmed. Overall, there's tension in the body and the dog moves more stiffly. For dogs that stress down, their overall body posture tends to be low, crouching, and back. They tend to want to move away from what is stressing them. But if the stressor is the entire classroom environment, that can cause pacing or restlessness or pulling in different directions. The tail will likely be down or tucked. It may wag only at the tip or only a little. The ears are usually back and low and may be tucked tightly back. It's very important to share these signals in a way that helps teach the owners what to look for, so that the owner can recognize when the dog is struggling and needs extra help and coping skills. Stressed dogs are not able to process human language as well, if at all. That requires the frontal lobe of the brain. A dog that is in fear mode is not operating in their frontal lobe. They're in the brainstem mode, survival mode, lizard brain. So it's important to remind the handlers in class that the class is for them to learn how to train their dog at home between sessions when it's more relaxed and able to think, and that the dog is having a hard time, not giving them a hard time. We'll cover several ways to help these dogs and handlers in just a moment. Some signs of stress, in no particular order. The dogs may be highly distracted, sniffing the floor, pacing and restless, only wanting to lie down, jumpy, hyper, alert, hyperactive, climbing on the handler, literally bouncing off the walls, trying to hide, shaking or having leg tremors, panting when it's not hot. The eyes may be wide or show the whites of the eyes. This is called whale eye. Or they may freeze and stare hard. Sometimes this is right before a bite. They may shed hair and dander way more than normal, drool more than normal, refuse to take toys or treats, or take them with more force. They may yawn repeatedly even though they're not really tired. They could do quick lip licks not related to food. They may exhibit compulsive behaviors like chewing on a leg or foot or spinning. And they may get diarrhea, have submissive urination, or not be able to control their bladder or bowels. Some more signs can include lifting a front paw, the hair raised anywhere on the top line of the dog. This is called piloerection. Whiskers moving forward or being held that way. Screaming, which is a favorite of my mom's chihuahuas. Whining, barking. Often the barking is higher pitched than normal. Shaking off as though they're wet when they're not. Having sweaty paws that leave footprints all over the floor. And turning to clay. This is the sort of thing you'll recognize if you've ever tried to move a fearful dog. They tend to get so stiff, it feels like they're made of unfired stiff clay. Stress and fear can cause fight or flight. Those are what most people are familiar with. But it can also cause a freeze, or a fawning appeasing response in a dog that stresses down, or a foolish and fidgeting response in dogs that stress up. The dogs that stress up tend toward acting silly and foolish, or being hyper, or not being able to stay still. Fawn is another response to fear in which the dog will use appeasement behaviors toward the aggressor, and will cover a submissive role in a moment. The issue with a dog being stressed is that it can make them feel defensive. Being nervous and jumpy about a situation is a sign that the dog feels unsafe. And when dogs feel unsafe, they tend to try to protect themselves. Usually, the first line of defense is avoidance. They try to get distance between them and whatever is causing the stress. But when they're on a leash or they're inside, they know it isn't possible. Unfortunately, some dogs learn the best defense is a good offense. They do what they can to look scary, so the thing that's stressing them goes away. This can range from showing teeth, to growling, to barking, to snapping and biting. If a dog is showing any of the signs of stress, don't move into their space. If they come to you and want to sniff you, let them do so without reaching for them. They are seeking information about you, not wanting to be friends. Just remain neutral and focus on the handler or other students. If you want a shy or stressed dog to be more comfortable with you, sit down in a chair and ignore them. If they want to investigate you, just stay relaxed and don't make direct eye contact with them. It's not recommended that you take their leash and try to work them yourself. Just do your best to instruct the handler in how to best help the dog. Another thing that's important for owners to understand is the concept of the reactive dog protecting them. Most of the time when people say their dog is protecting them, in reality, the dog is trying to protect itself, and it's using the best defense is a good offense strategy of looking scary so that the threat hopefully goes away. But if the threat were to escalate, the dog's more likely to hit the end of the leash in the opposite direction and try to escape instead of attack. This is very important for owners to understand because, once again, if the person recognizes the dog's behavior as a sign that the dog is having a hard time, they look for different solutions to help the dog instead of thinking the dog is just behaving badly and needs a correction, or that they're feeling confident and being protective. One more type of dog you might see is a stressed dog that has been punished for giving warning signals and no longer barks or growls. Punishing a dog for barking or growling only removes the warning signals by teaching the dog it is dangerous for them to bark or growl. It doesn't change how the dog feels about the stressor, in which case all that has happened is that the ticker has been removed from the time bomb. And you get a dog that only has bite left in its self-protection toolbox. So it, quote, bites without warning. Quotes because there's plenty of body language signals before the bite that tend to get ignored. So back to fear aggression. Other signs of fearful aggression can include body posture. The body's low, back, or moving away from the threat. They may use lunge and retreat behavior. But to add confusion, it can also look very assertive and confident if the dog has learned that that's what it takes to be successful in scaring off what makes him or her nervous. Like putting on a costume, they'll assume the posture of a serious threat, but the behavior is still based on an underlying fear. Fear-aggressive dogs tend to either bite with a quick bite and release, or they do a series of incredibly fast bites. They might also wait until you turn away and get you on the back side of your body. If they haven't learned bite inhibition, these bites can all be very damaging. The top left, ears are back, bodies looks low, the dog is not directly facing what it's barking at, there's some whale eye, and it's barking, but the lips are covering the teeth, like he's trying not to show the teeth. The dog in the top right, it looks like the person is showing the dog the back of their hand, like that'll make it all okay. Don't do this. It's not the right way to greet a dog, and this dog is clearly not okay with the greeting. On the bottom left, you see the dog is showing an anxiety-based display. Its tail is down and looks stiff. Its ears are back, its body's low and very tense. On the bottom right, the dog's not showing aggression yet. But if you see this posture, please back off. This dog feels completely trapped. And if it does bite, it's likely to lunge at the person's face, right where it's looking. Lastly, I want to talk about the submissive rolling body language. This can be fairly obvious when you know what to look for, but people can mistake it for an invitation for a belly rub, and that has the potential to be an invitation for a bite. A dog that literally flops down on the floor like a puppet that had its strings cut, flips onto its back quickly, all loose and wiggly, open mouth with tongue lolling out, and a fully loose wagging tail, is probably asking for a belly rub, like the beagle on the bottom right. A submissive dog will be tense and drop and roll over, slowly like they're being careful. The tail is generally tucked and may wag stiffly in short wags, or maybe only at the tip. Ears tend to be back, eyes may be squinty, and the mouth is usually closed. This dog is not asking for a belly rub, and he doesn't want one, but will often tolerate one. They are saying with their body language, "Please don't hurt me." And if you do interact with the dog, when it's over, they're likely to pop up quickly and be more loose, maybe even shake off, because they're relieved that they survived the encounter. So if you have a dog in class that reacts submissively to your approach, or that approaches you and does a submissive roll, don't reach for them. You can talk sweetly to them, briefly, and then encourage the handler to call the dog out of the situation, and educate the handler if they think the dog is asking for a belly rub. So how do we help dogs and set them up for success? Visual barriers can be a great tool for dogs that are overwhelmed or stressed about the proximity of other dogs or people. They can also be great for dogs that are overly excited about other dogs or people. And barriers help all the dogs to be able to focus more on the handler and less on the others in the class. It gives them their own safe space to work, and I think barriers should be set up for all the dogs in a class before each class starts. As you assess the behaviors of the dogs in the class, you can remove the barriers for the dogs that are more comfortable that day. You can have the dogs come outside of the barriers to work, either individually or in pairs. But having barriers sets all the dogs up for success and can reduce their stress about the already stressful situation of being in a new place around unknown people and dogs, being asked to learn new things in a foreign language. They really don't need the extra stress of other dogs and people in close proximity until they're more familiar with them and have a little bit of trust in them and have gotten beyond the acquisition phase of what they're being asked to do. They also need to acclimate to the sights, sounds, and smells of the building and get more comfortable with that. Some dogs only need a few minutes for all that. Others might need till the last class, or maybe even their next class. Remember, we want the dog to learn a new skill, and then add distance, duration, and distractions. So why would you want heavy distractions involved in vying for the dog's attention from the start? Or try to get the dog to learn something new when it's not even sure it's safe? Barriers also let the dogs use toy play as a reward without overwhelming or overexciting the other dogs. When you have the barrier set up, you don't want to invade the dog's safe space. If you need to get closer, walk to the side of the barrier, not the opening. This puts a barrier between you and the dog, rather than you blocking the only exit the dog feels he has. Another way to help is to teach the dogs to settle on a mat, rug, or towel, and give them time to rest and relax during class. An hour is a long time for a dog to stay engaged and working. Usually you would never ask a dog to work that long, and the handlers need to understand that. Encourage the students to let their dogs take play breaks, chase the treat breaks, and rest breaks. They can sit on the floor if they're able to, or sit in a chair and just pet the dog while they listen to you and the dog relaxes for a bit. The dogs are more likely to relax if the handler sits down and relaxes too. Also, try to assess what's stressing the dog and see if there's anything you can do to fix it. If it's visual, will more barriers help? Will moving the dog out of the room help? The handler can stand in the doorway to hear you while the dog works in the entry hall, assuming there isn't traffic there. Be sure the dog was able to relieve itself outside before class. If the dog is focused on trying not to have a potty accident, he's not focused on training. Is the handler calm? Dogs can pick up on the feelings of the handler, so if the handler had a bad day and is frustrated, or maybe was running late and is stressed out, that can affect the dog. Have the handler sit down in a chair and take some deep breaths. Focus on just petting the dog and bringing down their heart rate for a few minutes. Might not be a bad exercise for all the handlers at the start of class. Have the handler try easy behaviors with the dog. Can the dog take food? Will it eat food off the floor? Try dropping food on the floor one piece at a time. When the dog eats a piece, pause for about 1 second or 2 seconds and then drop another piece. The purpose of the pause is to give the dog a chance to look up at the handler, which the handler can then mark before dropping food again. Use the food drops to move the dog around a little bit. The dog should have to take a step or two at first to get the food. Gradually add more steps until the handler can toss the food and the dog will go get it. Then come back for a hand-delivered treat and then another toss. If the dog knows some basic skills, like sit or spin or hand touch, have the handler work on what the dog knows and reward it heavily. Will the dog play? If so, try to use play as a way to loosen the tension and give the dog something fun to focus on. Then toy play can be used as a reward for the cued behaviors as well. You want to mark the dog for looking. If the dog is stressed by a particular thing, mark the dog for looking at that thing and then reward. In class, you can use barriers and maybe distance to help the dog with this, but this advice is great for owners with dogs that get fixated. The first step is to add distance from what is bothering the dog. The farther away it is, the safer the dog should feel. And that will make it possible for the dog to look away during training. If the dog can't look away, even briefly, they're too close. At first, the handler will be marking when the dog looks at the other thing. and give the dog a reward when it turns to the handler in response to the marker. It sounds counterintuitive to mark a behavior you don't want, which is staring at a trigger. But what happens is that by making the looking a rewardable behavior, it becomes more about, I look to get a treat, versus I look because I'm concerned. The other thing that naturally happens as the training progresses is that the dog will look at the trigger for less and less time before turning to look at the handler. When they recognize that looking at the thing is what is making the handler click, then when they look and don't hear a click right away, they tend to look back at the handler. Hey, I looked. Where's my click? At that point, the handler can switch to marking the dog for looking back at them instead of when the dog looks away. And now you're rewarding the dog's choice to give their attention to the handler. This process needs to be repeated from the start with each new encounter with a trigger. But with practice, the dog will get really fast at progressing to the click for looking away part. At that point, you can start with clicking when the dog looks away, but don't rush to that. So at first, it's the dog fixates on something and the handler gets a treat ready. Mark happens while the dog is looking at the thing. The reward is delivered while the dog is looking toward the handler, so you want to have it in your hand already and offered toward the dog before you click, because you may only get a really quick glance, and you want them to turn around and see that reward so that they know that it's there. You're going to mark as soon as the dog looks back at the trigger, and then the reward is delivered when the dog turns back to the handler. You have to be quick about getting the treats ready, or maybe put a few treats in your hand at the same time. You want to repeat the last 2 points several times, rapid fire, until the dog is engaged in the quick pattern of look, click, look away, get a treat. Then get slow with the click. When the dog looks, wait half a second before you click. The reward still gets delivered when the dog looks at the handler. You want to increase the delay of the click and be ready to click as the dog is turning back to the handler. If you hold the click for a full 2 seconds and the dog is not looking back, go back to the rapid fire pattern, or you may need a little bit more distance. It doesn't take long for the dogs to switch from looking because they're concerned to looking to get a treat. At that point, you have the emotional shift you need to make training happen. So back to the classroom. If the dog is still stressing or he has no interest in rewards, then just being in the training space might be all the work that dog can handle as they acclimate and get more comfortable and realize that they are safe. That's okay. Be sure the handler understands that the dog is not bad or failing. The dog is struggling and communicating that and learning to cope. And it will learn to work in the environment as long as it's not being pushed and further stressed. Encourage them to work between classes by taking the dog to new, low-activity places as much as possible. Ideally, a new place each day. Take a chair and just sit and let the dog observe. Let the dog sniff around to the extent of the leash. Mark and reward when the dog chooses eye contact and engagement. If the dog is able to maintain engagement, then they can start to train the easy stuff in that environment. This can translate to the stressful class environment. I'll cover this in the engagement section too. Being able to quickly acclimate to new places is a skill, and it can definitely be learned and practiced. Good places to go include empty church parking lots, quiet parks, the club's parking lot when the building isn't in use, and several of the lots on the street that the club is on would work great too. They don't need excitement and interesting sights for the dog. Most important is that it is new to the dog. Boring places the dog hasn't been before. The activity level of the new places can gradually be increased each week, but distance is a friend. Stay on the edges of the activity, and if the dog moves away, you're too close. So what do we do with a disruptive barker? First, it helps to assess and understand why the dog is barking. Is it over-arousal? Is it stress? Is it frustration? If the dog is over-aroused or overexcited, maybe because there are other dogs and people and they're somewhere new and it's all awesome, that dog needs barriers to help them focus, and they need to have their focus shifted to rapid-fire task work. Have the handler use a tether or a class assistant to hold the leash so they can have 2 hands free. It helps to have the tether or helper hold the leash in a way that puts the handler between the dog and the attractions. This way, the dog is not wanting to turn away from the handler. It might just be trying to look around the handler. Instruct the handler to get several tiny treats in one hand, and with the other, deliver them to the dog as fast as possible, one at a time. Gradually slow the speed of the treat delivery. Then start dropping treats on the floor for the dog to pick up. Then have the handler drop treats next to the dog when the dog looks up at them. Now the handler should be able to do some training with the dog. If the dog goes back to over-arousal, go back to earlier, more rapid-fire stages of the game. The handler has a high-energy dog and is going to need to be fast with their engagement and treat delivery. If the dog is not interested in treats, see if a tug or other toy can be used to get the dog's attention. If nothing else, a mouthful of toy mutes the barking. And it may just take some time for the dog to acclimate. Mark and praise the dog for moments of attention on the handler and of calmness. If the dog is not interested in taking treats or toys, and the barriers aren't helping, the dog might need distance. Try having the dog work in the hall with the handler in the doorway. The dog would need to be held by a helper so that it can't get through the door. When the dog settles, try bringing it back into the room. You might need to go in and out a few times until the dog learns that barking gets it taken away from the excitement. Being in that hyper-aroused state is very tiring for the dog, and the environment loses its newness and some of its excitement as well. Odds are good that the dog will start to settle as long as the handler doesn't get over-aroused as well. Keep reminding the handler to take deep breaths. You just need to manage the behavior in a way that lets you continue to teach the rest of the class while the dog works through finding itself in doggy Disneyland. So what do you do if you determine the barking is because the dog is stressed? Dogs that are hyper and stress up can often include barking. This can look the same as the barking done by over-arousal, and the same protocol can be used for them. And if the barking is due to frustration, can you remove or change the conditions that are causing the dog to get frustrated? Maybe the dog's frustrated because it can't see over the barrier in spite of repeated jumping. Try moving the dog to the opening of the barrier. If it gets quiet and just wants to watch what's going on, reward the dog for looking. If it continues to bark, then it's frustrated because it's not engaging with the other dogs and people. It likely needs distance, and you can try having the dog move to the hall, explaining to the handler that distance is their friend, and the dog is having a hard time and hasn't yet learned to control his emotions in close proximity to the distractions. The distance should help with that. Maybe the dog's frustrated by a slow handler. Is there anything you can do to help the handler speed up? Maybe remove the treats from a hard-to-use treat pouch and put them on a table just outside the barrier. Or recommend a different style clicker or a verbal marker. Maybe tether the dog so they get the leash out of their hands and have one less thing to worry about and fumble with. If it's a small dog, maybe they can just stand on the leash. Or use the barriers to fully contain the dog. Maybe the dog's confused about what the handler is asking of them, and you need to adjust their training explanation. How can you break the training into even smaller, easier steps? So what if you do if a normally relaxed dog is having a bad day? I can't stress enough that you should be teaching the handlers to train the dog that's in front of them. What this means is reading the dog's body language constantly to assess how they're doing at any given moment. What is the dog telling you? And adjusting the training or ending the session in response to what the dog is saying. Would you do the exact same thing with all the dogs in the pictures? This is actually a series of photos I took of my dog titled The Many Faces of Dazzle, but it shows several different moods and emotional states. All dogs have sensitivities and fears. So do people. These can change based on the dog's age, brain development, training, and other factors. And dogs can very quickly change how they're feeling from one moment to the next. For example, a dog might be doing great. Then a loud clap of thunder happens and the dog instantly changes into a fearful mess. They get a dump of survival chemicals in their brain and it stops working like it was a few seconds ago. Can you continue to train the dog like you had been before the thunder? No. Training's over for that dog, probably for the day. If the dog were to have a less severe reaction to a sudden trigger, you might be able to adapt the training to what you would do to help a stressed dog feel more comfortable, like I talked about earlier. When there's a stressed dog in class, be sure the other students understand that they should pay attention because there are times that their own dog may struggle with coping, and they'll need to know what that looks like and how to help them. Another possibility that can change the dog you normally have is trigger stacking. This is when the dog experiences a series of stressful or exciting events within a 3-day period. 3 days is approximately how long it takes for the dog's brain to return to chemically normal after it gets a dump of those survival chemicals in its brain. This happens with people too, so I'm sure you can relate. Maybe on Friday you spend the evening grooming your dog and packing for a trial, staying up much later than you usually do, and stressing over how it will go, and if you have everything. That's trigger A. On Saturday, after only a few hours of sleep, you get up to go to the dog trial, and in the process of making coffee, you snag the machine and it goes crashing to the floor, no longer able to produce your favorite brew, but causing you to spew several bad words. You know you need to stop somewhere to get coffee now, which adds to the stress and the timeline of the morning. That's trigger B. You go to let the dogs out, but you see that the windstorm that blew through overnight knocked down part of the fence, so you have to take the dogs out on leash, making you run even later than you planned. When feeding the dogs, you knock a bowl of food off the counter, and they all dive for the treat scatter, and then they get into a tussle. Thankfully nobody's hurt, but that's trigger C. You finally get to the trial site, and you can't find parking. You hurt your hand trying to get your crate set up, trigger D. Then you go to check in, and the trial secretary informs you that one of your classes has to be canceled due to a judge illness, and you totally lose it. So let's look at that time period from the dog's point of view. When you would normally be sleeping, your owner's fussing over you, making you stand on the grooming table, and even cuts a nail too short. Ouch! You don't get any sleep during the night because you're certain that the windstorm is going to kill you all. Then you hear your human get up, but she smells stressed. And then she throws the coffee machine on the floor and starts yelling, so clearly there's something really bad going on. You need to go run in the yard to work off the stress, but your human wants you to walk politely on a leash? What the heck? She makes up for it by doing a treat scatter. That gets you super excited. But then your brother jumps on you and his teeth hurt, and Mom is still really mad, and you're back to being stressed and starting to get sore. Mom tosses you in the crate in the car and you think, finally, I can get some sleep. But she's driving like a maniac and sleep is not possible. You get to the trial site and get really excited by all the commotion, but you also just really want to take a nap. You finally get comfortable in your crate, then another dog suddenly appears and starts sniffing your house and you think, not today, buddy, and you let him have it. Are either one of you going to have a good trial? Are you going to wonder why your dog didn't perform the way he does in practice? Do you think maybe you have had people and dogs that have had similar stressors showing up to class, and that maybe they'll get more stressed when their dog isn't doing well? Of course. Maybe you've had that kind of day before you get to class. Remember when I mentioned it might be a good idea for everyone to sit down and take some deep breaths at the start of class? Being aware that trigger stacking happens and understanding why you are ready to bite someone's head off can help you mentally process the emotions and control them. Give yourself grace. Give the students and dogs grace. Take lots of deep, calming breaths and encourage your students to do the same. Reminding them that learning new things is stressful, and we live stressful lives, but training should be fun for both ends of the leash. And the better trained their dog is, the less stressful and frustrating it will be for them to have the dog by their side.